So here we are. Um, First part of part 3 will be to report that I have worked on the nut. A closer image will be inserted. So here's the nut. String slots are filed down for the action at the first fret, and the top of the nut has been filed off. It was a very hard bone, and you can see that there's different colors. It wasn't a well bleached bone. It has a little bit of figuring to it. All of the tuning buttons have been tightened up and they are working extremely well. The tuners have no loose posts. Oh, a little one there. And then a couple of the nuts were a little bit loose. And other than that, everything was pretty good with the tuners. So I have identified 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 high frets of the frets I could test without using those as part of a reference that need to be taken down. Fret number 3 has a gouge in it at the E and the B string, which I'll have to try to smooth off. Looks like it must have gotten hit right on that point to put little divots in that fret. And I'll have to clean up the fret ends, and then I'll lubricate the board and everything once it's all cleaned up and everything after that. I am not going to video the entire work. Just before I started to think about taping up the neck, I thought I'd open the pickups and see what was under the pockets. Sometimes I get surprises underneath these things and they're full of white stuff and dirt and all kinds of things. Well, points for Ivy on this one, clean as a whistle. And so stand by for bridge pickup. Another set of points, clean as a whistle, nothing in there. I guess I'm going to have to subtract some points because I was wondering why the pickup was wobbling when I was trying to adjust it, and it turns out that this screw is warped right in the middle. Crooked screw. I'll have to dive into my stash and replace that one. Okay, so there's the bent screw, and unfortunately it is one size difference than every screw I have sourced for pickups from multiple sources. So it's not a standard size screw, so it's got to go back in. So I've been up and down the sides with the sponge, and a lot of it's smoothed out. I've got a few here that are a little bit hesitant. The top is a lot better. Wasn't as bad to begin with, nice and smooth there. I've got a chunky one there, that last one there's a big nipple on it. I'll have to work on it. There's just a couple of spots over here where I'm going to have to just touch it tiny little bit with the file. Just to give it the edge, not to bite into my finger. Now I like to do all this before I do the rest of it, because it's much harder to do this properly when it's taped up. I use 3 different sizes of tape to work on the guitar. I have a 2-inch, half-inch, and 1-inch. And I'm taping these up. I want to protect the nut up here this time, so I've got a couple of 2-inchers and over the first fret because I don't want to touch that one. And then I'm using the 1-inchers between here until I get to the spot where they're too narrow. I switch to the 1/2-inchers, and when I get to this spot right here on the neck, just after the 12th fret, this piece of tape is basically just the width of the 13th fret. And then when you get to the 14th, you've got to do that. Take an X-Acto very carefully and just run it along the side of that fret. And out the piece of tape and just pull it off until you get the little curl. And you got to do that for all the other ones up the neck until you're done. And that's why these things take a long time, and I don't videotape the entire episode anymore. I have a video online on my channel. It's just all about the neck. When I was building the Telecasters, it's everything about the neck. I'm going to do this one a little bit differently than that one, but I showed how to tape the whole thing up there. So if you're watching one of my videos for the first time, this is what it looks like when it's taped before you start working on those frets. And now before I start working on my MacGyver tool to try to flatten this, cheers. So this is what I could find that had a flat end on it, which is part of my speed square. And the trick is to put masking tape there and behind your piece of cut off sandpaper, so that when you want to get rid of it later, you just have to peel that off and throw it away. And the idea was that you're supposed to be able to place it on here. Would have been nice if I had something wider, but I didn't. So I'm going to do this. And the idea is just to run it back and forth, respecting the little bit of a radius that you have on these boards. Not pushing, just back and forth, but not down. To lightly go over it, and then you see what's happening. Yes, I'm getting some tops of some frets that are actually showing signs. So I had this one. Oh, that gouge is gone. Here, darken that up a bit. There was here. That one is still pretty big, that one too. I don't want them high at that end because they have a tendency to ground out down here at the heel. Anyway, I'm going to play with this, guys, and I'll get back to you. So I've run back and forth a lot, and I've got a couple of high spots. Everything else seems to be working good, so I'm just going to take my fret file and see if I can tackle the one by one and just take down that height that's giving me a little bit of trouble. The second fret remains defiant. So this tool worked pretty good. I put 220 sandpaper on the bottom of it. I've never used 220 on here before. Worst I've gone was 320. I also had this sanding stone or sharpening stone, which I was trying out. It's not long enough to give me the flatness that I was looking for, although it did give me, you know, pretty good coverage in short areas. And I would use it probably down here if I wanted to create a little bit of a roll-off at the bottom end. When I retired, I knew I was going to have a hobby for guitars, but I thought it was to learn how to play. I never thought it was going to take a turn for also building and reworking and doing things like this. Just a little spot in the middle. Now marking it with the pen, as some of you probably have seen other people do, allows you to see where you're removing material. It's just a Sharpie. And when using this thing, you go over the top and from the side to try to get the edge so that the end crowning won't be so difficult. Top and both sides. And then when you've made a couple of passes, just check it again. And it's good. Now you got to check the one next to it, because when you take that one down, you want to make sure you didn't create an imbalance on the other one, which I did. Right here in the middle. And let me check the one on the other side of it as well. That one's good. So, yes, don't forget to do that. If you bring one down, check it on both sides using that one, just to be sure. Because what was level, when you finish taking one down, may no longer be level. I learned it the hard way by not knowing that when I was starting out. And I couldn't figure out why I was having so much trouble trying to get them all level. These files can be quite aggressive. They'll leave a lot of tool mark. Alright, finally low enough that it shouldn't be a problem. Alright, the next step is MacGyvering the crowning. Okay, so here's a trick I learned from Dave of Dave's World of Fun channel. Get yourself a piece of sponge like that. Wrap yourself some sandpaper around the edges of it. I start with 320 when I want to do this. And then you get yourself situated at an angle where you can run it across the frets at an angle, which kind of curves up the sides. Whoops, and sometimes when you're trying to save to be able to use as much of this as possible, you end up with a tiny little bit on this side. Boop, right there. And then it pops off from under your thumb. And this should take off the remaining black that's left on the frets. Both directions. And for Defiant number 2, you've got to do a little extra work on it. A little personal special attention, because it was flattened off quite a bit. And just move the sandpaper a little bit to get a new section and go back at it. This is the fastest way that I found out of many of the techniques to round the edges quickly. Now when you're doing this, don't stay in one place too long, because you'll start to make your frets uneven again. Try to cover them all equally. Give them equal time. This guitar is going to be nice in the end if it kills me. And you know, that's pretty nice now. And then we have to move up to the next sandpaper. After this I'll go 400, and it will continue to smooth off the tool marks. 400, 600, 800, 1000, 15, 2000, and then, you know, finally a little bit of individual attention here and there, and then it'll end up being the buffing compound with the autosol. Another main reason I fix all these fret ends first, which I've learned by experience, is that when you're doing this, they don't end up to chew up your sandpaper when you're doing this part. So this is 400. And you can start to see how they're starting to shine up along this fretboard, if we can kind of get them in there. Yeah, there you go. So I've pre-cut all my pieces of sandpaper that I'm going to use. I find the straight edge of my foam. So now I've done the 600. Get off of there. And I'm up to 8. Now when you get to the finer levels of sandpaper like this, you don't need as many passes as you did initially with the more coarse sandpaper to actually get the edges to shape up. Now it's just about taking off tool marks. Oops. And there you see, that's what's happening on the sandpaper. It's starting to show right away. Now some of that's from the tape. Alright. Ooh, they're starting to shine up. I really like that. It's a plan coming together. Now, the steel wool. So what I was saying is that the sandpaper you know, takes out a lot of the tool marks or the scratch marks from the coarser grit when we started, but it's still going, you know, longitudinally with the neck. When you have strings on it and you want to try to bend them up, you'll still feel those little tool marks with the strings, especially the non-wound ones. So going the extra mile and giving it the frets longitudinally a little scrub this way, it will change the direction of any little tool marks and scratch marks to go along with the way that you would bend it up this way. And what actually happens is it just polishes it up, makes it really fairly shiny, more shiny than even the 2000 will do. And then that just takes the elbow power to do each fret individually. I should say this is why the tape goes on the pickups, is because this leaves little bits of metal filings everywhere, which will definitely be attracted to your magnets, and so they have to be taped up. and you need to be able to vacuum up all these little bits of filings that are going to be everywhere on your work table and all over the guitar neck, any place else it can get to. So I think that's pretty good. Let's give it a finger check. And up here they seem to be good. Alrighty. The next step will be the cream, which is very dirty and very messy. Okay, I've got all the filings vacuumed up from everywhere. So here's how I do this. Blue shop towel, Autosol, just a dab, a tiny little dab, doesn't take a lot. I smooth it out. Actually, you know, it's kind of like, that's even more than I would normally want to do. It has a very, very fine grit in it. Now I know people are going to say, well, you could do that with a Dremel, blah blah blah. Yep, sure you can. I've tried that, and getting those little cotton balls to spin, and when you're trying to get them up and down there, it does a job, but it also spits stuff everywhere, which I really don't like. So I like what I call the personal touch. I can feel it when I do it with my hands. I can see it. It takes a little bit longer, but hey, I'm retired. I have the time, and I call it a labor of love. I'm putting love into this guitar to make it mine, the way I want it, the way I like it. I don't like Les Pauls generally. What happens is that you end up with this black. So then what I do is I just fold that back, put another little dab of Dooya over here, just like that, tiny little bit, just massage it on there, just a little bit like that, in the light, and then just run it. Automating the work and making it easier, I like ideas like that. And realistically, I could do that with my Dremel if I want to have the splatter. And I know I'll get comments about, well, I do it and it doesn't splatter. And that's good. My air conditioner just came on, so I'm expecting there might be a little bit of background noise, but there, let's see. Huge difference. And I can be a little bit anal about this stuff, but I have the time to do it right. And I handle all my guitars in the same manner. Once they're mine, they get all equal loving treatment. I can't remember who showed this trick. It might have been Crimson Guitars also. Before you start, put a strip of tape along the edge and then put the other tape on top. So if you can peel this piece off, it makes it easier to get all these pieces off the top afterwards. So these frets are what I would call akin to what should be coming out of a custom shop where somebody spends this time, you know, putting the love into the guitar, and that's how they should come out. On budget guitars under $500, you'll never get a guitar with frets like that, so don't expect it. So pretty much you're going to get a buffet of things that could need to be done, and you need to be ready to do that for yourself and make the guitar your own. You know, realistically, even guitars above $500, you'll need to do work like this. So listen, when you pull the tape off of these things, especially if you tape up your pickups like I did, there's a little bit of residue left on there. Get it off as soon as you can. I'm just using a little bit of guitar polish to shine up the chrome again that I had shined before I put the tape, which helps it not stick too much while protecting them against all the little metal filings. Looky here, looky here. Look at that fretboard. That turned out to be a wow in my books. I let it sit here with the lemon oil on it for about 5 hours and wiped it up, and that's what it looks like. It's probably going to dry up a little bit more, but wow, almost there. So here's the circuit. It's not unlike the circuit that has been done in the other guitars, except that this one has 2 tone pots. So starting with the tone pots, what I'm going to be changing here is this capacitor. It's going to be changed to 33 mics instead of the 47 that's in there. I believe I will retain those pots because they're working just fine. So the volumes are going to be changed to the push-pull type. So basically I will need to unsolder all the wires that are currently going to the volume pots, and I have to redo it like this. So here on the neck, I'm only going to be putting in one partial split. So this is the split wires here, the white and the green, which come down, and it's going to go to the common right in there on this side, the one side. And so when it's in, this common is connected to the number 2 and nothing will happen. So the neck is going to have the full output as it arrived. And then when you pull up, then this resistor here will be put into the circuit, which will maintain some of the slug coil operating so that the volume doesn't drop all the way down to where it would be if I didn't have that 2.2K resistor there. And everything else on the pot will remain the same. It's already wired for separate volume controls, which usually means the hot is in on 2 and the signal is out on 1, which goes to the jack and to its tone pot. On the bridge, it's going to be a little bit different. We are going to have, when it's in, I'm cutting a little bit of the lower end and a little bit of the higher end off with the resistor that I'm putting in there, which is going to be a 62K. So when the pot's in, the second slug coil is going to have a 62K resistor in parallel with it, which changes the impedance of the coil and brings down the overall output about, I'd say, a hair's worth, a millimeter amount. Very, very insignificant amount, just enough to take some of that grunge off of the end of it. And then the split will again go to the common. And then what I'm putting up here on that coil is going to be a 680 ohm resistor, which I've tested in order to get the split a little bit balanced between full on, this would be full on, and then split mode. And that's what my ears liked, testing it with the 65 Deluxe, as I did with the other ones. And then the wiring for the rest of it basically remains the same. I will not need to go into the cavity for the switch. It's wired correctly. Okay, here's a quick look in the electrics cavity. It's a rat's nest. I'm going to have to pull all the pots out to be able to do what I want to do. This is the split wire which I've uncovered there, and the other one down here. I've tested these with the partial split technique that I'm going to do on these pickups. Guys, I am totally surprised that inside the cavity, right up onto the walls, is actual shielding paint. This up on the top here, it's just paint, but actual shielding paint. Alright, Ivy got a couple of points back. Hey, hey, hey. Here it is. The rewire is complete with the push-pull pots. I have desnaked it somewhat, and the small change to plan was the capacitors. Instead of 0.033, they ended up being 22s. For two reasons. I didn't think the 3.3s I needed, and I didn't have any. The next step will be putting some strings on it, giving it a test. The saddle on this thing is not half bad at all. It's got no springs and little washers and stuff that will move around on you. The saddles are pretty solid on the screws. Welded nuts on the back, so that's nice. And it's pretty good for a tune-o-matic with V-grooves. The only thing I do is take my, I have a roller bridge coming, and the only thing I do with these things is take my little triangle file and just go across the V-grooves to smooth them out, because there's usually little burrs on them that you can't see very well, and that will tend to bind on your strings as well. That's the problem of these things. And they're not cut to the size of the individual strings. They're all the same, so these ones up here are smaller than they should be, except for maybe the D string. And the G, B, and E high strings are all larger than they have to be because they're all the same size. So I'm not going to worry about that. I've just gotten all the burrs off here with my little triangle file, just a touch. Just have to take the inside and just smoothly go up there. You'll feel it, and that'll help until later. I'm getting ready to put strings on. I'm going to be putting a set of the Dario EXL Plus Dash 3D, which are 9.5s to 43. Doesn't say on this package. It said on the box. So here I am about to put the strings on, and because I super saturated the fretboard wood with lemon oil, and I've wiped it up a number of times, it's still sweating. I noticed that when I put my hand on it to move the guitar around, when I took it off, it was sweating lemon oil out through those open grain pores that were quite visible before. It's still happening, and I want to get most of that wiped up as I can before the strings go on, because that'll get on your fingers, it'll get on the strings. So what I'm using is just a normal hair dryer, and I'm heating it up to make it sweat a little bit and wipe it up so that I can get it as dry as possible, so the strings are going to be protected. And it goes like this. Now, for anybody that's watching that hasn't seen one of my other videos about stringing and locking the strings in place, this is what I do. Now, on a Gibson style bridge, what I'm going to do is I'll put the saddle in place. I'll put the saddle in place. I'll put the tailpiece in place. I mount the two E strings. If the tailpiece won't sit there while I'm doing this, I'll put a little piece of masking tape over the end to make sure that they stay in place. But then when I get the two E strings in, it holds it anyway, so this is good. So all the posts have to be adjusted so that the holes are pointing at a diagonal going towards the top on both sides. You put your string in, you hold it, give yourself some space like this. You bring the string then from the outside to the inside, underneath, hold it tight, pull it tight against the post, flip it over the top and lock it in like that. And then all you have to do is spin it up. When it gets halfway around, make sure that that is nice and tight around the post and that the string is going under. Don't kink it back here in your hand. It's going to go down, underneath, make sure it's there. Spin it and then just let it sit in the slot like that. Make sure it's in the V groove down there, or your roller, whatever you've got. And that locks the string in place, and it gives you a full turn and a half, that if you needed to loosen the larger string, you can do it and actually still just put it down on the side if you had to do anything on it. And there's plenty of space on there and not too much string. And this will hold it right up there against it. So the winding is actually holding this part up there. And then what I normally do is I cut this down about this high, and then I won't do that till the end. Then I'll take the pliers and I'll just turn it over. I might show you that at the end. Just turn it over, make a little loop on it like a shepherd's staff, so that the pointy end is not hanging out that can hurt you or anybody else after that point. The other side is the high E. On a 3x3, it goes through, and what I do with this one is I give myself some space over here, but I want a few more windings. I'm going to give it a little bit more space over here. Again, it goes from the outside in, because these posts turn in the opposite direction. Outside, oh, inside, underneath, over the top, like that. And what I'm going to do then is kind of get that locked in like that. Right? Now, you start winding it up, doing the same thing, holding the string. I know my arm is in the way. Holding the string so that it goes down underneath like that. Wind it up I like more windings on the small strings because they're tinier. Make sure it's in the V slot, which I didn't do. And then just tighten it just slightly like that. And that holds your bridge on and your tailpiece no problem. And that string is also locked in place with the tension against the post and make the loop. So that's how all 6 of them are done on all my guitars. And I have never had a slipping string ever since I learned this technique. I highly recommend it. And now I have all the 6 strings on, and I'm going to just stretch them a little bit and let the tension on the neck build up. Let it sit for a while before I start doing the setup again to put it all back to the specifications of our liking. And then once all this is done, we'll plug it in and see if she'll play. Guys, I don't know if you'll understand or even believe my unbelievable bad luck. But after doing all the work on this guitar and making it basically custom shop level, I finally took the truss cover off of for the truss rod, and the bolt is stripped in the head of the truss rod. Unbelievable. Wow. I think I've put somewhere in the order of about 12 to 15 hours of work on this guitar, and I have a 4.5, and 4.5 is just a little bit too big to go in that opening, so it had to have been a 4, and it was stripped out. I just learned another invaluable lesson. Now that I've changed all the stuff on this guitar, I don't believe it's returnable. So I'm going to have to eat whatever the problems are with it and own it. Too bad for me. You know, I would have found that right off in the beginning if the neck had not been straight when I removed the strings to do the fret leveling automatically. I would have had to adjust this, and I would have found it right away. But with the tension off the strings, it flattened right out according to my leveling check ruler. Darn. Life happens, and you learn your lessons, hopefully. Check the truss rod first. Dave's golden rule number 1. I didn't do it. So here is the final phase of part 3. Push-pulls up on the volumes. The tones are tones with 22 microfarad caps. On the neck, there was no Fralin resistor in this part of it. Straight humbucker as it came. Split. This brings it down to a 2.2K on the slug coil. So that works the way I expected it to. The bridge has a Fralin resistor on the slug now, 62K, and I tested it prior to using that, and I like how that sounds. So pull the switch. So in using the 680, I achieved a tone I was looking for that I like. I can do stuff with that, I think. And even when it's split, it's clear. So that's the end of this. I am disappointed about the stripped truss rod nut. So far, the action is exactly where I need it. If anybody out there who sees this knows of some kind of a hack to be able to use your truss rod without having to disassemble the entire neck and removing the truss rod and breaking all this stuff up and trying to get it out, let me know in the comments whenever you see this. Since a 4.5 wouldn't fit, I was thinking that my hack would be to put a little bit of tape, try some tape around the end of it until I could push it in there to get a bite, and then maybe I could maybe get a little bit of a turn one way or the other before the tape gets chewed up, and then if I need a little bit more, I put a little bit more tape on it. If anybody has a better idea, please let me know. Anyway, that's it, guys. So it's going to work for a while, and we'll see where it goes from there. Thanks for watching, everybody.